Hello Forgers and welcome to Metasight, a podcast where we discuss SolForge Fusion mechanics, meta, and maneuvers. I'm your host Anque, and today I'm continuing our series on the last winter, new cards and evaluations. Today's episode will cover the Alloyin faction. If you tuned in previously, we've already gone through Tempest, and we will be continuing to look at all the new cards in the last winter. So, before we get too deep into this, I do want to talk about how we are going to evaluate these cards. First off, if you're not familiar and you haven't watched the previous videos, I like to look in terms of how far off in power level do particular ability combinations work, in terms of the different creatures, and so on and so forth. To do that, we're going to look at the 12, 18, 27 model, best sort of illustrated by the combat tactician, and this is sort of the balancing test that cards are used to sort of determine how strong their abilities are in conjunction with the stats that the developers award their abilities. So for example, with combat tactician, you get 12 points of stats at level 1, at level 2 you get 18 points of stats, and at level 3 you get 27 points of stats. So if you have a creature at level 3 that's significantly lower than 27 in stats, it's going to have a pretty strong ability to make up for that. In addition, when we're evaluating cards, we want to consider how strong is the card in the early game versus the late game. How bad does it progress if you miss it in the first cycle, and does it function well on an empty board? So keeping those in mind, these will be my opinions. I hope to spark some discussion with the new set and get people's opinion on it as well. But I'm going to go ahead and do my opinion on these cards. And let's go ahead and first review the holistic creatures, or the unforged creatures. So returning to the last winter, we have the Forge Plate Yeti, the Light Forge Sentry, Metamind Overseer, Palladium Pulse Mage, which is back from set 1, Portatron 2000, Shardbound Vexor, Spirit Forge Sentinel, Steel Eye Research, and Voltaic Prophet is also making a reappearance. But we came to talk about the new cards, so let's take a look at the Alloyin Patroller. So the Alloyin Patroller is a 6/2 at level 1 that reads Stealth, so it always has that ability, but also has Exalted, which is the new keyword ability for the last winter. Meaning that if it's in a lane with one of your friendly exalts, then it gains whatever is after the text. In this case, when an opposing creature comes into play, it gets Defender. At level 2, it becomes an 8/4 with Stealth as well, same text for Exalted, and then it becomes a 10/6 Stealth and the Exalted ability. In terms of stat penalties, we're looking at about a 4, 6, and 11 penalty, but we get Stealth out of that, and a pretty potent Exalted ability if you can make it work. So, Alloyin Patroller, in my mind, is a fairly aggressive card. If you can get this into a lane with an Exalt, it's going to be pretty hard for your opponent to keep something in front of it to block it. That said, it is very frail, much like when we talked about the Elementalist Knight in the previous video. It's going to die to just about any on-curve removal and some incidental removal. However, this functions much better than the Elementalist Knight. As long as you are able to kind of keep the way clear, it can keep on hitting. And your opponent, even if they do play something in the lane, as long as Exalted is turned on, it's going to go to the back. Alloyin Patroller, as long as it's in the front row, is going to get through. As the Forge flips, you may have the opportunity to remove your opponent's creature, and if they're off Forge, or whether they're on Forge or off Forge, whatever they put in front of it is not going to be able to block it, because it's going to get immediately kicked to the back row. So it is definitely a threat. I can see why it's a rare card. This is a much better demonstration of the Exalted ability, in my opinion, since the Stealth and the Exalted ability work well together. And overall, I do like this card. Again, it is frail, so you have to be careful if your opponent has a lot of spot removal or just sort of incidental ping damage, that kind of stuff. But if you can have a pretty reliable Exalt, it's fine. And even if you're on Forge and you don't have the Exalt ready to go, it can still get through for some stealth damage, so be aware of that as well. The next creature we have is the Alloyin Sage. So this one is a pretty interesting and very unique card. It was pretty well hyped when it came through in previous season. And what it is it is a 4/6 at level 1 mage, and at the end of the deck cycle, choose a card in your discard pile. When you would shuffle that card into your deck, put it on top of your deck instead. At level 2, it is a 6/9, same ability. And then at level 3, it's a 10/12, but you get to play the card for free at the end of the deck cycle. In terms of stat penalty, you're only taking a 2-point, 3-point, and 5-point stat penalty. Very, very minor stat penalty given the power of the ability. However, you do have to keep in mind that it has to survive till the end of the cycle to really benefit from its ability. You know, if you draw this in the first turn of a cycle, it's very difficult to keep it alive till the end of the cycle. Your opponent's going to have a lot of opportunities to get rid of it. That said, in the early game, it's got a decent enough body that it doesn't really put you behind in terms of tempo just to play this out. So I do believe that this card is actually worth leveling, even if you're not going to be able to succeed with the deck cycle, just because of how potent the final ability is. But I wouldn't play it over more important cards in your deck if you do have a particular strategy you're trying to fulfill that this may or may not reliably help with. Again, if you draw it the third turn of the cycle, it's much easier to put it out and keep it alive long enough to benefit from the ability. But you kind of are at the mercy of the shuffler in that you get it at the right time and you're able to protect it long enough to get it to trigger its ability. But yeah, it does something very unique. It's a very cool sort of boost for Alloyin, and it's very much inside of Alloyin's wheelhouse, in my opinion. The next unforged creature we have is the Brigard Carrier. So this is a 1/3 robot at level 1. It has mobility 1, and then it reads, when this moves lanes, you may play a gizmo minion in the vacated lane. At level 2, it is a 2/8, same thing, mobility, and you get a gizmo when it moves. And then at level 3, it's a 2/10, mobility, and you get a mega gizmo when you move it around. Now, it is very, very frail. You're taking like an 8-point stat penalty at the first 2 levels and a 15-point stat penalty at the 3rd level. That said, if you're able to play it and move it reliably, the body that it leaves behind really negates a lot of that stat penalty that you're getting. So, in effect, at level 1, if you can play it and get the gizmo, you're only losing 4 points of stats. Easily made up if you can chain it and do the, move it 2 times in a row. Same thing at level 2, you're only losing 4 points in stats with the regular gizmo attached to it, and then at level 3 with that mega gizmo, you're only suffering 3 points in stats lost. So yeah, this thing has almost no downside if you can keep it moving around and get benefit from those gizmos that it's popping out. That said, this is no Drix. It doesn't even come close to Drix in terms of its strength. But still a fine card. One thing to note about this card, and I play with it a little bit, is you got to be careful where you initially start it. Generally, you want to start this on either the leftmost or rightmost lane and then start moving it across the battlefield to ensure you have as much sort of leeway to move it around. If you play it in the wrong spot and it gets cornered, you're not going to have a vacant lane to move it on the following turn a lot of the times. The other thing you have to be very careful with this card on is that it is, especially at the first level, it can be taken out by some very simple board wipey abilities like Firestorm. 3 health is very, very little, so it's easy to pick it off, and it doesn't really fight back. So even a zombie, a mindless zombie is going to eat this thing pretty easily. So you just got to be careful about that to make sure what your opponent's playing. To make a determination as to whether this is going to be a good play for your deck. But if you have a lot of ways to benefit from those gizmos, and you have the ability to move it around reliably, then I think it can be a pretty good card. Another thing to note about this card is the ability is not optional, so I believe when you use this with swap effects, it's going to replace the creature that you swap it with. So like with a Portatron, you swap it with the Portatron, and the gizmo is going to pop out on top of that Portatron. I'll have to double check that with Nick. It may not be considered a vacated lane at that point, and it may not put out the gizmo, but then you're not really getting a lot of benefit out of it at that point anyway. Moving right along, we have the Metamind Warden. So this is one of my preview cards. I think this was actually my first preview card. So Metamind Warden is a 4/4 Metamind Scientist. It has Activate. Give a creature -2 attack. And then it also has the ability, when you upgrade a card, ready this. At level 2, it's a 6/6 with a -3 attack and same readying ability. And at level 3, it's an 8/9. Activate is -5 attack, same readying ability. In terms of stat penalty, you're looking at a 4, 6, and 10 stat penalty. And with the way it progresses, you can make that up with just 2 activations. So this is a very fine card, very well statted for on curve. And the amount that it can mess with combat math on the table can give you a lot of board advantage in just 1 or 2 turns. You can really it can really sort of run away with the game. It's especially powerful if you're off Forge and you make it your second play. You can often partially blank a creature and take the hit from it and then completely negate it the next turn. And if you happen to draw like an upgrade card, you get to activate it multiple times that turn and it's already gone well above its value. You can also throw this in front of something like as big as a 5/4, decrease its attack, take it out, and then you still have your 4/1 sticking around to decrease the attack of something else. So, very strong card, but you do need to have the board state to play it reliably. But if you can keep it out multiple turns, it's going to pay dividends on what it's doing to the board. It also helps to put creatures in range of abilities such as Suppressing or Sonic Burst. So yeah, I like this card a lot, especially if you have it paired in a deck with those kinds of abilities. Next up, we have another exalted creature, and this is the Shield Droid. And it's a 6/4 level 1, and it reads Exalted, activate, give each of your creatures 1 armor this turn. Level 2, it's a 9/6, and it gives 2 armor if you have the Exalted. And then at level 3, it's a 13/10, 3 armor if you have the Exalted. In terms of stats, this guy's got great stats, meaning that the Exalted ability does not have to be as reliable to kind of get something out of it. It's attack heavy, meaning it can easily trade. If you can meet the Exalt ability and you can at least hit 2 creatures with it itself and something else, you're gonna be break even on stats, because the penalty over time is just 2, 3, and 4, all on the defense. If you compare that to like the Combat Tactician, you're just losing a few points of health, but you get this massive armor, reusable armor ability. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of armor. I think it's kind of weak, especially like on the creatures where it's like a native armor ability, or temporary ones that don't refresh every turn. That said, on this, the fact that it gives it to your whole board and can really screw with combat math, as well as interact interestingly with cards like Forge Plate Yeti, and some of the new Ironbeard abilities, means I think this can be very much a role player in your deck if you have the Exalt support to make it work. That said, it's pretty straightforward what it does. Again, you don't need to have the Exalted to get a decent amount of stats at it, so it doesn't put you behind too much on tempo just to throw it out there and kill something or trade with something with your opponent, and then you have the bigger version later in the game. So it doesn't seem like 1 armor is that much, but over time and just enough combats it can make a pretty big difference. Especially powerful if you have your own sort of self-damaging cards like Mount of Heroes from Tempest. Put this in a Mount of Heroes lane, activate the Mount of Heroes, activate this first, then the Mount of Heroes. You're just getting a lot of free value that way. All right, we've got one more unforged creature, and that is the Soul Cipher. So this is one of my favorite new cards, and it's a 3/7 Robot Spirit at level 1, and it reads Deploy, you may switch a creature's attack and health. Level 2, it's a 5/11, same deploy ability. Level 3, it's a 9/15, and it's an activate ability at this point. So in terms of stats that you're losing for this switching ability is 2, 2, and 3. Very, very minor, almost negligible in terms of what kind of stats you're giving up. And you have a lot of flexibility with this card. It can effectively be either like a stout creature or an arrogant creature if you have nothing else going on. You can play it as a 3/7 or a 7/3 if it's the only thing you're playing out. You can really mess with your opponent's creatures or save one of your creatures. And then once you get to level 3 where you can activate it at will. You can do some really cool things with attack reducing abilities, such as we saw with the Meta Mind Warden. You know, you can reduce something's attack to 0 or less, or if it has very low health, you can flip it and then negate its attack completely. So, you know, your opponent's, 15-1 creature is suddenly a 1/15 you don't care about anymore. Yeah, so Soul Cipher, really cool card. The Spirit gives it a little bit of extra synergy with some of the Necrium and Utera cards that care about spirits. But overall, a nice little package. I really do like the Soul Cipher a lot. I am not sad to see this in my deck because it just has so much versatility in the way that you play it, even on an empty board. And it can do some really cool things that your opponent can't easily play around. Okay, and then after Soul Cipher, we have one final creature, and that is the Spirit Steel Infiltrator. So Spirit Steel Infiltrator is a 5/3 spirit with mobility 1 and aggressive. And then it reads, when this deals damage to an enemy player, you may give an enemy creature -2 attack. At level 2, it's an 8/4, mobility 2 and aggressive, and it gives -4 attack when it hits the opponent. And then level 3, it is a 10/5, mobility 3 aggressive, and when it deals damage to an opponent, you get to give a creature -6 attack. So this card I played with quite a bit, especially in Sealed, and it is a beating. The stat penalty you're looking at is -4, -6, -12, so by the time you get up to level 3, it's very, very frail. But the mobility and aggressive really balances that out, especially with the attack negating ability. This is a great off-forge creature where you can toss it out and either put it in front of a creature that has just enough attack not to kill it, and you can take out the opposing creature and then move it into a more favorable position. Or you can just hit your opponent and trigger that -attack ability. So yeah, I think Spiritual Infiltrator has its place in decks. I don't know if it's like that strong and constructed, but I'd love to see this card in Sealed, just because of the aggressive nature. It puts in a lot of work, hitting your opponent, decreasing the attack of your opponent's creatures, moving in the way to finish them off, or moving out of the way to do more damage that way. So yeah, very cool card. It reminds me a little bit of the Windspark Elemental, though it's not quite as potent in terms of taking out creatures. It does negate them, and it does have a much better stat line overall with that mobility added to it. All right, so that is all the non-forged creatures for Alloyin. Now let's take a look at what they've brought back in terms of the forged creatures. So all the forged creatures, as a reminder, are creatures that have an adjective and then have a sort of noun, and the noun is the forged creature that can have different abilities. For our baseline, we will look at the combat modifier with those creatures, but before we get to that, let's talk about what came back. So we have Allomancer, Assassin, Captain, Engineer, Justicar, Prophet, Researcher, Scavenger, Scrapper, Sculptor, Specimen, Tactician, Virtuoso, and War Charger is back. So nothing like super notable that's come back or left necessarily. Just sort of a nice mix of creatures that are coming back from the previous sets. Nice to see Allomancer is still in there, and Captain as well, as far as like Creatures Matters type cards. But yeah, let's take a look at our new guys. So let's start off with the Archivist. So the Archivist has the ability to deploy, upgrade a card in your hand. At level 1, you're getting a 4-point stat penalty. At level 2, it is a same ability, upgrade a card in your hand, then discard it with another 4-point stat penalty. And at level 3, it is just deploy, upgrade a card in your hand. You do not discard it, and it's a 3-point stat penalty. In terms of what you are getting, very basic ability. You're paying stats to get a free upgrade, and that's all there really is to it. In terms of, good things to, depending on what the modifier is you get with this, it could be interesting. but it doesn't do all that much on its own. And if the Archivist is not going to really help you with some sort of upgrade synergy, or it's going to put you behind on the board state, you might want to consider just playing the card you would have upgraded anyway, just to keep for yourself from falling behind on tempo. But not a lot to say about the Archivist. It has a pretty similar stat progression to the Aetherforge Oracle from set 1, but it doesn't have that really, like, you know, high power ability at the end where you get to, like, double upgrade cards. So trading a little bit, it's interesting because it is like a forge creature, so depending on what sort of modifier you get for it, it can be very interesting in sort of how it plays out. But, you know, nothing too fancy, just deploy, upgrade card. Next up, we have the Champion. So the Champion is a warrior, and it has the Exalted ability. Activate, give each creature adjacent to this +1/+1. You're only losing 2 points in attack stats. At level 2, it's got Exalted. Activate, each creature adjacent to this gets +2/+2. Only losing 4 points in terms of stats, mostly on the attack. And then at level 3, it's activate, give it, you know, Exalted, activate, give each adjacent creature +3/+3 in stats. Again, a little bit down on the attack, not too much of a penalty in the health category. And yeah, you can have some pretty interesting modifiers go with this. If you can reliably get the Exalted, this is a phenomenal card. You can easily negate the stat penalty just by buffing one creature next to it, and if you hit both, you're already ahead on stats on board. And if you can keep it on the board multiple turns with that Exalt ability, you can really power out your creatures and really take the lead in terms of tempo and keeping your creatures on the board and pushing through damage. So not a lot to say about the Captain. It does suffer from the other Exalted creatures in that you do have to have that Exalt to get a lot out of it, but with the right modifier and the right sort of stat allocation, this may be just a fine play, even if you can't reliably do the Exalted ability, with the fact that it scales so well in the late game that when you do have an Exalt out and in the future turns, it can definitely be worth playing, especially if you have somewhat of a go wide strategy going on. That said, if you do have a combat champion in your deck, make sure you're very cognizant of how you're placing creatures in lanes so that you can maximize it when you do get to put it out onto the field. All right, next up, we are continuing with our Bartok cycle with the Alloyin's version, which is the guide. So here we have the combat guide, and its deployability reads, give the next creature you play this turn +3 health. You're losing about 4 points of stats to do that. It's mostly it's sort of weighted towards attack. Cycle 2, you give the next creature +7 health. You're losing 8 points of stats in the process. And then in the combat guide, level 3, you give the next creature +10 health, and you are losing 8 stats. In terms of like how much stats you're getting out of it, you're only losing one, and you're actually gaining 2, depending on, assuming that you can meet the requirement of playing a creature afterwards. As I mentioned in previous videos, I'm a little hesitant on these Bartok-like abilities because it does somewhat commit you to your next play, in that you can't really, you lose the flexibility of being able to play a spell afterwards because you're kind of negating your own health benefit out of it. You're leaving a little bit of cost on the table. But the fact that it does give health lets you put up for really favorable catches and blocks, in which you can put out a creature, especially off Forge, in a lane that's going to catch a creature and keep it alive multiple turns, while using the combat guide to take out something, since it has a decent attack stat to begin with. Especially with the right modifier, this is just a very fine card. It is a mage as well, so it helps you with mage synergies, like with the Allomancer. So playing this into an Allomancer is a great follow-up. You know, you play the guide, drop the Allomancer gets some extra health, get to do a little bit of pinging, and you are good to go. So nice common base Forge creature. But again, you do have to be aware it's going to suffer from that Bartok ability, and that you're losing a little bit of flexibility for the advantage you're getting to give your other creature additional health. It's also really good to protect a very high value creature of your own. because you're giving it stats before your opponent has a chance to interact with it. So I will also mention that about it. So, you know, drop this, then drop a Dark Heart Sorcerer, you get an extra 3 health, and it's almost unkillable in cycle 1. So think about it that way. Alrighty, so next up we have the Hacker. So this is a rare forged creature, and it reads Mobility 1, and then when this deals combat damage to an enemy player, you may play a Gizmo minion. At level 1, you're losing about 3 points in stats. At level 2, again, if it's still combat damage to the Mobility 1, you lose about 4 points of stats. And then at level 3, you're losing 7 points of stats, but you still get the mobility, and you get Mega Gizmos when it deals combat damage. So yeah, I've not had a chance to really play with this card. It is a rare creature, so it's not going to show up that often. And it can have some very interesting modifiers on it. So depending on what modifier you get with it, that could dictate how good your version is going to be. If you get something like camouflaged on it, where it's got stealth and mobility, you can really move this thing around and make a lot of gizmos with it. They were careful not to let it do the gizmo play on any damage, so you can't like combo it with certain cards that will like cause any weird infinite shenanigans. So that was a good catch on their part, especially like with betrayers and stuff like that. But yeah, the Hacker, I imagine this is a pretty decent aggressive card that easily puts out some bodies. You know, if you can get in and hit with it once, the gizmo / mega gizmo you get out of it is going to more than make up for the stats that you're losing as part of the ability set. But yeah, the mobility is really nice. It lets you move it around. It makes it very hard for your opponent to block it, especially like as a turn 1 play. It can make it very awkward for your opponent. So yeah, I look forward to trying it out. Like I said, I haven't really had a chance to play with it too much, but I imagine, especially with the right modifier, this thing can be really, really strong. And finally, we have the Juggernaut as our final creature, forge creature. It's basically got Exalted, give it some armor. Across the board, it gives, so its progression is 3 armor, 4 armor, and then 5 armor, and that is the exact same stat penalty you're getting, 3, 4, and 5. So it's fine, especially if you can get it in an Exalt lane. Again, I do have issues with the armor as a mechanic in general, just because like it rarely makes up for itself. But because the penalty is equal to the amount of armor you're getting, it's a very light lift if you can get it into an Exalt lane, that you're not going to fall too far behind on tempo. And especially if you can keep it around multiple turns, then the value of that armor really goes up. But there's not much else for me to say about it. It's pseudo vanilla in what it does. It just sort of has this interesting little armor payoff if you can put it in an Exalt lane that may or may not help it survive a little bit longer. But, you know, if you go up against Necreum, where it just gives those -X abilities, it doesn't really care about armor, so take with that what you will. Juggernaut, okay, it's fine as a common. The Exalted is, you know, probably not that hard to pull off if you have the Exalted creature. With the combat, stats are fine. It's not too below curve, so it's not the worst card to get to put out on the field, especially if you have the right modifier to go with it. All right. So that is all of our forged creatures. Let's take a look at our forged modifiers. So returning, we've got Ardent, Arrogant, Bolstering, Camouflaged, Combat, Prepared, Progressive, Researching, Salvage, Stabilizing, Stout, Suppressing is back, and Venerable as always. In terms of our new abilities, we'll take a look and start off with Advancing. So again, we'll use the Tactician as our baseline just so that we can kind of see how these abilities are affecting stats. And what we have here is Advancing Tactician. When our creature replaces this, you may upgrade a card in your hand, then discard it. So this is sort of the inverse of, I believe it was called Repurposed in Battle for White Fang Pass, where you get the upgrade when you replace the creature. When that creature replaces something rather than it being replaced like the Advancing does. You get a 2-point stat penalty, just a little bit of attack and health is lost. Level 2, same ability. You only get to upgrade a card when you replace the creature, but you're taking a 4-point stat penalty at that point. And then at level 3, you have an 8-point stat penalty, but you get to keep the card that you upgrade. Nothing too fancy. This ability I'm not super excited about, especially with the way that they did the stat allocation. The biggest problem is that it's kind of... it loses both attack and health, so it's a big cost to just replace a creature willy-nilly. So ideally this would have a higher health rather than a, like, if it was going to lose its stats, it would lose it on the attack and not the health. So at least you could catch something or block it, and then it survives a round, and then you just replace it, so you get a little bit of usefulness out of it. In this case, with advancing, you know, you may not be able to be in a situation where you can play the creature and then also have it, you know, duke it out in combat and then replace it the following turn. So you're kind of reliant on it being on a good creature with a decent deploy ability to begin with. I'm not a big fan of advancing. I don't think it's very strong. I guess in a deck that has a lot of upgrade synergy, it might be okay. But, you know, it's a pretty big cost to replace a creature without getting any other benefit than just a little bit of future like a future level up that you may or may not see in the following cycle. Whereas you could just play, you know, the card you want to level up. There's not as many, like, you know, with the repurposing from Balefright Fing Pass, you could like drop that on top of a gizmo, and then you still get the upgrade ability, and you get the bonus from the gizmo. With this one, it's, you know, it's unlikely that you're going to get this on a creature that you want to replace that can survive a combat and really make up for it. So, not big fan of advancing. I think the stat penalty is a bit too much for what you're taking, and it would have been much better if it had more of a health than just sort of like, you know, even stats across the board where that penalty came in. So yeah, that's kind of, I'm not too high on it, but let's move on to the next ability, which is Citadel. So Citadel reads Defender. Just gives a creature Defender and extra stats. It's a +2 on the first level, +3 on the second level, and +4 on the third level. So it's fine. I don't think this is quite as good as the set 1 ability called Protecting, which gave it mobility and Defender. But if you get this on a creature that you want to keep on the board multiple turns, you know, like on an Allomancer or something like that, it can give the Allomancer a decent amount of stats and keep it in that back row, so it makes it much more difficult for your opponent to get through to it. And, you know, it can clog up a lane for multiple turns. It's not quite like Vigilant from the Tempe's ability. It's a bit more dirtily in terms of the ability, but it does put a lot of stats on the board. So don't be afraid to play your Citadel creatures. If you can take out a creature, one of your opponent's creatures with it during a block, and your Citadel creature is going to survive. They also function as really good underdrops, since they are a bit above curve in terms of their stats. You know, these creatures can give you a little bit of benefit if you're playing them in the second or third cycle as your level 1. And yeah, not too much to say about it. You know, giving a creature Defender has its use cases. Giving a little bit extra stats to keep it sticking around longer is nice. But it's no Protecting. That loss of that mobility is a bit of a knock against it. Coming up next, we have Guard. So, Guard reads, at level 1, deploy, you get 4 armor this turn. Level 2, you get 6 armor this turn. And level 3, you get 8 armor this turn. You are only taking a 1-point stat penalty. I think Guard is a great ability to get tagged onto one of your creatures where you're not losing much of anything in terms of the stats you're getting, but you do get a nice, healthy bit of armor, which gives you sort of that buffer you need to do setup turns, right? So, you know, you can drop this into a lane to trade with something, but it does let you leave your guard down if your opponent's got something in an open lane without taking too much damage. And the amount of armor you're getting is much more than you would see in sort of like a Utera deck that gives you health. The progression is much stronger, so even if you don't maximize the amount of armor that your opponent's dealing in damage to you, it's not that big a deal. Like, again, you're only losing 1 point in terms of stat penalty, and you're getting this nice little shield, which I think is what, about looks like an 18 life over the course of 3 turns. If you can, happen to hit it every single turn, and you have it on a creature that, you really want to play out, again, thinking of you, Allomancer, right? You're not taking much of a penalty, but you are getting a sort of a buffer to your life total, and it allows you to put that creature in a more open lane and not have to worry about falling too far behind from taking damage from your opponent. So yeah, Guard, nice ability for sure. Next up, we have Magnetic. It reads, deploy, you may move and exalt to this lane. It's the same thing on all 3 levels, and you're only losing 1 point of stats for that ability. The great thing about this is that it does not care whose exalt. It could be yours or your opponent's. And even if there's no exalt on the field, you're only losing 1 attack on the first 2 levels and a little bit of health on the 3rd level. Totally fine, doesn't put it that far off from combat, and it does give you some flexibility, especially in a deck where you have a lot of exalts, or your opponent has exalts that you can move around and mess with them on. Next up, we have Mobilizing. So Mobilizing reads, give a creature mobility 1 this turn at level 1, give it mobility 2, and then give it mobility 3. You're losing 1, 2, and 3 stats over the course of the 3 levels, almost nothing. And being able to move a creature when your opponent least expects it is a great ability. You can even target itself, so if you drop this on a gizmo and then, move it into a more advantageous lane, it sort of negates that sort of awkwardness with the gizmos where you have to make sure you're putting them in the lane that you want it to be in for a future turn. So yeah, you can drop this onto a gizmo, move it in position, and benefit that way. Again, it's going to depend on what kind of a creature you have it on, but very, very cool ability for very, very minor stat cost. A lot of the Alloyin abilities have very minimal stat penalties on them, which is nice. And then finally we have Zapping. So Zapping reads, deploy, give the opposing creature -3 attack. For that, you're losing 2 points in stats. Level 2's version, you give the opposing creature -5 attack, losing 3 stats. And then level 3, deploy, give the opposing creature -9 attack, losing 6 stats. You're actually netting stats out of this, and you can completely negate a creature, or really, this is a really good ability for just eating the opposing creature and catching it. You neuter its attack, drop this creature in the lane, and it's basically like effectively, like at level 1, it's effectively having like a 5/8 creature or, a 7/13 creature. I mean, it's just so high up on the stats you get there that I really like this ability. Again, it's a little bit restrictive in that you have to have, your opponent has to have a creature in an empty lane when you play this, or at least in a lane where you're okay replacing. But yeah, I think it's fine. It also sort of sets you up for like those suppressing plays or Sonic Burst plays. And on the right forge creature can be really cool, especially ones that have mobility, like the new Hacker or the War Charger, that kind of stuff. I think the War Charger was in here, right? Yeah, the War Charger. Yeah, you just drop this out, and then decrease the attack of your opposing creature, and then move it out of the way. Very, very cool ability. And I would not be sad to see this in my deck, for sure. So that is all of our modifiers. So let's move on to our spells. So as before, we don't have many repeat spells in this set. Only 5 of them have come back, and everything else is new. So we got Electronet back from set 1, Energy Surge, Lucid Echoes is back as well, Metasight, and Sonic Burst is back. So 3 really powerful spells coming back into the fray from the first set that did not see their place in the Battle for White Fang Pass. But let's talk about our new spells in the last winter. We'll start off with Aerial Assault. So this reads, give a creature mobility 1 this turn. This turn it gains when this moves into a lane with an opposing level 1 creature. This destroys the opposing creature. At level 2, it's mobility 2, and again, it's level gated to only hit level 1 or 2 creatures. And at level 3, it gives mobility 3, and it destroys any opposing creature when it moves into that lane. This is a really cool card. It's basic. It's somewhat like you could compare this to Dreadbolt. It's like the Alloyin version of Dreadbolt. It does require you to have a creature on the board. It does require that the creature you want to kill have an empty lane, because you can't just put this on a creature that's in the lane with the creature you want to destroy. So it is a bit more restrictive in that way. But it does have some serious combo potential available to it. The fact is, if you can move that creature multiple times in a turn, then you can take out multiple creatures with it. That said, I play with this quite a bit. I do have a deck that I put it in with Korok's Whirlwind ability, so you can kind of drop this on a creature, move it, and then Whirlwind it in front of a second creature, so you can take out 2 creatures with 1 Aerial Assault play. But I found that it is very, very difficult to line it up that you can actually hit multiple creatures with this in a single turn. Just because either you have creatures opposing the creature you want to kill, or your opponent doesn't have the right level creatures opposing, or you're on Forge and they're off Forge and you're on an empty board, so like you don't necessarily have the opportunity to play this and move it in front of a creature. So it's very timing dependent. It's a bit finicky. But if you can get to proc multiple times, it can be really, really strong. It's also really strong on creatures with slay abilities, like Cacklebones, or Bride of Frankenbaum, or, you know, even something like a Banshee, just doing extra damage, getting a little bit of extra out of the deal when you have that slay go off, since it is giving the creature the ability and not just an effect of the spell. So yeah, Aerial Assault, really cool card. I'm not disappointed to see it, but it looks a lot better on paper than it actually plays out, from my experience. Next up, we have the Alloyin Monolith. So this is an Exalt. It has Deploy, upgrade a 1 card in your hand, then discard it. And then it has the Activate ability, destroy this to give your creature in this lane 6 armor this turn. At level 2, you can upgrade any card, and the Activate ability gives 10 armor and then destroys it. And at level 3, you get to upgrade a card in your hand and keep it in your hand, and then the Activate ability gives the creature 15 armor. I like this card. I think this is what Shield Node needed to be. The upgrade may or may not always be relevant, but it does give you something to do on an empty board if you don't have anything else to do. The other thing about it is it's really good at protecting your creatures, especially on your second play of the turn. It's great for setting up off Forge, where you can have this on the field in front of a creature. Like, so say your opponent's on Forge, they play a creature, you play this opposing that creature, you get your free upgrade, and then the next creature you play, you can just drop around top of the monolith, pop this to give it armor, and you've just taken out your opponent's creature and kept your own with no loss of health, no loss of anything. Sure, they'll probably have another creature in an open lane, but don't underestimate the fact that you can activate this at any time. That I think these Exalts where you can time when you use them are very, very strong. It allows you to do something over on a different turn, not reliant on exactly what you have in hand. You just have this sitting around waiting to be popped when you need it. It's also good at enabling the Exalt synergies, or the Exalted synergies. And yeah, I think this doesn't look like much, but I think it plays out a lot better than it looks. It's also pretty cool with Forge Plate Yeti. You know, if you have a creature, you put it in the lane, put the armor on it, gives a lot of armor, and then you follow it up with a Forge Plate Yeti, and you can really nuke something out of orbit. Alright, so next up we have the Drone Hive. This is one of the Slay Exalts, so it reads, your creature in this lane has Slay, you may play a Gizmo. Level 2, when you play it, you destroy your level 1 Drone Hive, you get a free Gizmo. Still get to Slay and make a Gizmo. Level 3, you destroy your lower level versions, and the Slay becomes play a Mega Gizmo minion. Very cool card. It is a bit of a tempo loss because you don't even get a gizmo out of it. You get nothing out of it when you first play it, right? Unless you happen to be off forge and you know you're going to kill something with a creature. That said, it combos with some cards really well. The Flame Shaper Savant and Dark Shaper Savant can really go off with this because the level 1 the gizmos are level 1s. You put this in the same lane as your Flame Shaper Savant. The Savant triggers, kills an opponent's creature, you get another gizmo, you can use it to kill another creature, you can kind of machine gun down the other side of the board that way if you have a high enough level Shaper and there's enough stuff on the board to make it happen. The nice thing is that those gizmos don't have to go into empty lanes, so you can put gizmos on top of gizmos. At the higher level, you don't have to put the gizmo on the same lane as the drone hive, so you get a little bit of added value that way. And once it gets up to level 3, those mega gizmos are no joke. You know, they just give you a lot of stats on the board. This also pairs really well with cards like Blizzard Shaman or Furious Shardback or things that can hit multiple creatures in one activation. Get multiple, just sort of fill up your board with gizmos. So a lot of combo potential with this card. Definitely look out for it. And I think you can find lots of little fun little synergies with it. Next up, we have the Mech Armory. So this is another spell exalt. It has the deploy, put 2 energy counters on it, and then you can activate it, remove an energy counter, give a creature in the lane +2 attack. And then if it's level 1, it gets mobility 1 this turn. So it's a level gated. At level 2, it gives +4 attack, gives mobility 2 if the creature is 1 or 2, and then at level 3, it gives +8 attack, mobility 3 if the creature is level, any level at that point. I think Mech Armory is probably one of the weaker ones. I'm surprised it's rare. It's not one I really want to see. I think it's just such a big tempo loss to play this out. And the amount of attack you're getting out of it is not that exciting. The mobility is kind of awkward at times because oftentimes you may want to keep the creature in the lane, so really are you getting that much of a benefit? You never know. It doesn't like ready the creature or anything like that. That would be kind of cool if it readied the creature as well as give it the ability of mobility, or just read like, you know, move the creature so it can have like an activate ability or something. But it's kind of lackluster to me. It can't do a whole lot on the board other than give a little bit of stats and move stuff around. But yeah, I'm not super big on the Mech Armory. But, you know, if you have energy counter manipulation, like with energizing creatures, you know, you can just keep putting stats on something, moving them around. But, again, it's level gated. That's really awkward about it. But over time, you do get a bit of stats out of it. Again, kind of lackluster in my opinion. I have yet to see it be really utilized in a overpowered way, but it's probably okay and sealed. Don't really see it as much of a constructed card, to be honest. Alright, so next up we have the Overwhelming Force. So this reads, give each of your creatures +3 attack. All of your creatures in lanes with your exalts get 3 armor this turn. At level 2, it's 5 attack and 5 armor for your exalted creatures, and then 8 attack and 8 armor again for your creatures in exalt lanes. So this card gets more and more powerful the longer the game goes, especially if you have exalts that stick around. By the time you get to level 3, and if you have exalts across the board, all of your creatures are getting that 8 armor. So that can be pretty strong. It's a bit above, it's almost like Utera's Ferocious Roar, minus the fact that you don't get to keep the health after the turn is over. But the amount of stats you're getting out of it can be much greater, especially since it affects all your creatures. You don't have to like choose a couple creatures. So this is a great for an aggressive deck, especially an Exalt heavy aggressive deck. Gives your creatures a lot of stats, protects the ones that are in Exalt lanes, and yeah, I don't mind this card, especially if it's in a deck with cards that I really want to be like Exalts I really want to be playing, and it's in a deck where I want to go wide. So yeah, pretty cool ability, or pretty cool card. Not a lot else to say about it other than it's just a way of just pumping your whole team. Worst case scenario, you have no Exalts and you're just getting a lot of attack across the board. Next up, we have Reconstruct. So this has been hyped pretty well. At level 1, it reads double a level 1 creature's attack. At level 2, this is free, double a level 1 or 2 creature's attack. And then at level 3, it's still free and it doubles any creature's attack. So this is a great card if you can get it past level 1 without costing yourself an action to do it. So it's a nice card for as an upgrade target. You know, I think it's, you know, I have yet to really play with it too much. I think it's like kind of win more at some kinds, but you can steal a game with this really easily if you have ways to make a creature huge or a creature with breakthrough really big, and then just dropping this on that creature out of nowhere can really dump a ton of stats on the board. The hard part is getting past that level 1, right? You have to get past the level 1, either by upgrading it or finding an opportunity to play it where it isn't going to cost you too much in terms of tempo lost by playing it. Also note, it says double A level 1 creature's attack. It doesn't say a friendly creature or your creature, so just be careful with that. If you're just trying to like level it up on an empty where you have no creatures out. So, you know, it's okay. I haven't really been on the receiving end of this, and I don't have any good decks with it in it, but I think there's been a lot of theory crafting around it. I can see where it can kind of steal games out of nowhere, but as I said before, you really want to get past that first level to really utilize it, and if you miss it in the first cycle, it's going to be really hard to catch it up. Next up, we have a Renewal. So Renewal reads, give a creature 8 armor this turn, ready it. Level 2, it's give 12 armor, again, ready it, and then level 3, it's 18 armor and ready it. This is basically Alloyin's version of Utera's Lead the Charge. It gives more armor, but it's a little bit weaker because the armor doesn't stick around. That said, if you have a cool creature with a readying ability that's really relevant, or you have a creature that you just need to protect, this will almost certainly keep that creature alive in most cases. So, you know, it can be worth the action, especially if it's on a creature. Like, you can play, you have a creature with an activate ability, you activate it, dump this on it to protect it, activate it again. In that regard, it can be pretty strong. But again, the armor is temporary. You've probably heard my opinions on temporary armor. It's almost always going to give you more than, it's not going to give you as much as you think it is, but it will definitely protect your creature for another round of activations. Next up, we have the Seal of Anvilon. So this is another exalt, one of the energy exalts. Deploy, gets 2 energy counters. Then it reads Activate. Remove an energy counter from this to give an enemy creature in this lane a -4 attack. Then destroy it when there's no energy counters. Goes up to 7 at level 2 and then 10 at level 3. So I'm a much bigger fan of this than I am of the Mech Armory. I think this one's much, much better. The nice thing about this is it enables Exalted, which is already a good thing. Usually the amount of attack you can negate is enough to keep your creature alive in that lane. So you activate it once, get a favorable block out of it, take out the opposing creature. And then you have the sticking around, just sort of waiting to be cashed in at the most opportune time. So it really kind of makes it awkward for your opponent to play a creature in the lane with the Seal of Anvilon, knowing that at any point you can just cash it in to negate that creature's attack. It kind of forces them to wait till they are off Forge in their second play before they put something important in that lane, and then you still have it the following turn to use it. So it's very nice in that you can kind of split it up over multiple turns, and you get to choose when you activate it. I can't stress enough how important this is, that having abilities that you can activate at will on a card that's very difficult to remove with your opponent's abilities is really strong in this game. So yeah, Seal of Anvilon, play with it, try it out. I think it's a lot better than it looks. It's especially strong and sealed. It's great for clogging lanes, and it's great for enabling Exalted. And finally, our last spell we have is the Silver Arc. So the Silver Arc was the Alloyin Exalt that came from the PAX storyline event. This is what got introduced when I believe Steel Rosetta unlocked the artifact in that story. But what is Silver Arc now? It is a Exalt that reads Deploy. You may give a creature +3/+3. And then when you replace a creature in this lane, give your creature in this lane +3/+3, and then destroy this. Level 2, it's 5/5 for both abilities, and level 3, it's 7/7 for both abilities. So the +3/+3 at level 1 is just on par for a lot of like singular buffing targeted effects. If you look at like Druid's Chant or Spike Carapace, Pterodon Nest, like all these sort of level 1 abilities that give +3/+3 is kind of right in line with what you'd expect. And then you're left with an Exalt that lets you do something cool in a future turn. Either you can just enable Exalted and not care about this replacement thing, or you find an opportunity where you drop a Gizmo, then drop something on top of it, and now you got like a +5/+5 or +7/+7 on the creature you play in that lane. And you can just like dump something out with huge stats to cash in the Silver Arc. So yeah, very cool ability. I like it. But again, you need to have it at the right point in time. It has to be relevant on board. It's going to be kind of weak if what you're doing is just using it to trade up with a creature, because you're costing multiple actions. But if you can save a creature and kill your opponent's creature by playing this, then it pays it off very well for this card. All right, so moving along, the last we have to go over is the Soul Binds. So for what's returning, we've got Regia, the Iron Lady, and Soltar, the Forge Master. Arguably, probably two of the weaker Soul Binds from from Battle for White Fang Pass. I would have much rather seen something like Madlewinter or even Magnetic Field come back, but it's fine. I mean, Regia and Soltar are okay, even if they aren't exactly like constructed worthy cards. But we did get some really cool ones, and we'll lead that off with Gox, Metamind Paragon. So Gox is a 2/5 Metamind Scientist at level 1 that reads Deploy, play Central Conductor, and then activate, give each of your creatures in a lane with one of your Exalts +2 attack. What is Central Conductor? Well, it reads, this has 2 Exalts adjacent to it, transform this and put an energy counter on it. And then when it's transformed, it becomes Mass Link. Activate, remove an energy counter to play an Exalt for free. And then if we go back to Gox, he becomes a 2/9 at level 2, gives your exalted creatures +3 attack. And then a 2/13 gives your exalted creatures +5 attack. So Gox is a phenomenal card in a deck where you can fill your board with Exalts. One thing you want to be careful of is you always want to make sure you're not putting the Central Conductor on the lane 1 or 5, because you'll never be able to transform it. It needs to be in either lane 2, 3, or 4. Ideally, I almost always play this in lane 3. It gives me the most flexibility of where I put my next 2 Exalts. If you can get this in a deck where you have, upwards of 4 to 6 other Exalts you want to play, it's very easy to transform it, and then you've got a really nice way to play even more free Exalts with the activate ability. If you happen to have Energizing, you can recharge this because it does not destroy itself, so you get to keep playing Exalts that way. But that said, you do need a lot of Exalts to make this work, but once you do, it is a beating. One of my favorite strategies with this that I've been trying is using this with Thunder Crash Field from Battle for White Fang Pass, because you get those Exalts, you get those spell sprites, and you just keep pumping up their attacks and just doing all this ping damage to your opponent. And you definitely want to play this with Exalts that like to stick around, and not so much with Exalts that self-destruct. So things like Thunder Crash Field are great. Even a thing like the Silver Arc, where it just kind of sticks around until you use it, is great. It's a little bit weaker with the Exalts that destroy their lower level versions, because it's harder to fill your board with those. But yeah, in an Exalt heavy deck, this Gox is really, really strong, especially if you can keep them on the board for multiple turns. Definitely something you can build your deck around. And then next up, the last Soulbind we have is Espionage. So Espionage reads, play Assassin's Cliff, give a level 1 creature stealth this turn. You may give its opposing creature Defender this turn. I'm just going to read through the spell first. Level 2, give a 1 or 2 creature, +3 attack. This turn gets stealth. Give the opposing creature Defender this turn. And then level 3, you get to transform the Cliff. Or play the Assassin's Mount. Give it +5 attack. Give the creature +5 attack. Then move its opposing creature. Give it Defender this turn. Mouthful. So basically, you're giving a creature stealth and then pushing the creature to the back. What does the Exalt that comes with do? Well, we got Assassin's Cliff. When your creature in this lane deals combat damage to an enemy player, deal 4 damage to an enemy creature. And then Assassin's Mount is the same thing, but it just deals 8 damage instead of 4. So it kind of puts the creature in that lane and kind of creates a like sort of a mini Windspark elemental effect, in that you hit your opponent with that stealth creature, and then you get to ping something else off in the process. It's hard to evaluate this card. I think the weakest part of this card is that the ability to give stealth is level gated, especially given that you can't even give the opposing creature. You have to give it to the opposing creature of that level 1 creature, right? So it's very, very finicky in where you get to play this and when you get to play this, because it doesn't, drawing this in cycle 2 and you have a level 2 creature, all you get to do with this card is play the Assassin's Cliff. You don't get to give anything defender. You have to have a level 1 creature to give it stealth, and it has to have an opposing creature to give defender. So it's not as great on defense. This is a very offensive card. You need this for offense as a way of pushing creatures through. And it's especially weak off Forge if you have nothing in the front row. So, I think it's interesting. The fact that it gives a little bit of attack in the later levels is cool. It's a little awkward that the damage that's being dealt by the Assassin's Cliff and the Assassin Mount is kind of like capped at 4 and 8. 8 damage is not a ton in cycle 3, but it is enough to finish off a creature or take out a creature when your opponent least suspects it. So yeah, espionage is okay. I have yet to see it in action. Hopefully it functions better than it looks on paper. But even if you can't sort of maximize the espionage aspect of it and just have that exalt out, it is always going to threaten your opponent to keep that lane blocked and make sure that they aren't taking damage from the creature in that exalt lane. But again, it's combat damage, so you can't do cheesy things with like Shamblers or the ilk like that. So yeah, that is all of the Alloyin cards for the last winter. We will talk about the Forgeborn in a later episode, but for now, hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on some of these cards that I went over today. And don't forget, if you enjoyed it, give a like and a subscribe and leave a comment so we can start a discussion on the new set. I am very excited. I think Alloyin got a very big boost in this set compared to the first two, especially with the wheelhouse of abilities that came back with things like suppressing and sonic burst and those types of effects. And Alloyin is getting much more of an identity than it has in previous sets. So thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys for the next episode of Metasight.